So good evening, everybody. Venerable Chudran is in Australia, Sydney, today, and so I'm Venerable Chinny, and I will be doing some review on the topics. But let's start with a motivation. We frequently say a prayer by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, which we said this morning. It includes the line, "The meaning of my life is not simply to be rich, respected, famous, healthy, or happy. The meaning of my life is to be of benefit to sentient beings. Therefore, from now on, all actions I will do for the benefit of all sentient beings." So just thinking about that commitment of what is the meaning of my life? We have so little time. Our lives are so short. And then even in the context of that short life, by the time we eat and we sleep, make sure that we have enough food, there's so little time in the day. What is the meaning and how do we use that time? So through our own past actions, we've been able to create the causes to meet the Buddha's teachings, especially to receive the teachings on emptiness. The teachings that provide the very key to being able to escape from the cycle of existence. And so simply thinking about the meaning of our lives being of benefit to sentient beings. Take the opportunity tonight to spend a moment reflecting on their own difficulties, the very pervasive dukkha of being born with bodies and minds under the influence of karma and afflictions. How it's true for everybody we know, every animal, every human, every being in every realm. So commit ourselves again to cultivate a conviction that we can be liberated from cyclic existence. We can cultivate all of the love and compassion necessary to propel us to wish to do it for all others. And that we really can commit to a great resolve to become Buddhas, to be of benefit to all living beings. And to use this teaching tonight to create the seeds for that. So, as usual, when preparing for these reviews of Venerable Chudran's teachings, I'm just so filled with gratitude that we have the opportunity to get teachings like this. And also amazed at the skill of this teacher and how, in reviewing the 2 weeks that I was looking at, reminded again and again, especially when she's teaching on emptiness, how the teaching itself is not just on the text, but how she's inserting how to meditate on emptiness throughout the entire teaching. she'll stop, she'll lead a little meditation on emptiness, and then she'll go on with the text. And, I hardly notice unless I'm going back and really reviewing and taking apart what's happened. So really, like that, as I was thinking in this motivation to take this, where we're led to think about the nature of reality again and again and again, is so rare, so totally rare. And to be able to use this for leading ourselves along the path to enlightenment is just something to be really grateful for. So I followed right up on Venerable Tarpa's review from last week, so I'm doing 2 weeks of teachings, February 11th and February 18th. And that was when Venerable Children started teaching on a new section in Mind Training Light Rays of the Sun on developing ultimate bodhicitta. So it's like 2.5 hours of teaching's worth, I suppose. She covered a page and a half of text. It's very, very full and detailed. So I'm not going to do that. And I will do my best here, knowing that all errors are my own. They have nothing to do with the teaching or the teacher from whom the information came. So we'll just do it. So this section is called on ultimate bodhicitta. Ultimate bodhicitta means the wisdom realizing emptiness. Interesting, Alex Berzin translates this not as ultimate bodhicitta, but as deepest bodhicitta. That was an interesting way of thinking about it. And I got to, the question, what is ultimate bodhicitta? Why is it called bodhicitta? I didn't really find that, but I did find where His Holiness says that conventional bodhicitta is the altruistic intention, which we know, the primary mind with 2 aspirations, the aspiration to benefit sentient beings and the aspiration to become a Buddha in order to do that. Ultimate bodhicitta is the exalted wisdom that directly perceives the emptiness of inherent existence that is in the mind stream or in the continuum of an Arya Bodhisattva or a Buddha. That's ultimate bodhicitta. That's where you find it, is in the mind of an Arya Bodhisattva, a Bodhisattva who's directly realized emptiness, or the Buddha. So then he says, conventional bodhicitta is the actual bodhicitta. However, ultimate bodhicitta is not the actual bodhicitta. It's just given the name bodhicitta. So not to be confused there. So the other thing that I was thinking about background-wise is like, why do we need to learn this? This is not easy stuff for most of us. And so to think about it again in the context of this whole teaching on mind training like rays of the sun, I went back to His Holiness again, but everything the Buddha taught, every single thing the Buddha taught was to lead us to the realization of emptiness, to lead us to understanding the nature of reality. And His Holiness pointed out something I'd never thought about, but that different versions, maybe variations on a theme of just about every other aspect of the Buddha's teachings you'll find in other religions. They're not packaged exactly the same way, or they're not maybe talked about in the same way, but all the things about ethics, all the things even about developing love and compassion are not unique to the Buddha's Dharma. What makes the Buddha's Dharma completely unique is the understanding of liberation and how we are here in cyclic existence, tossed round and round and round and round and round, life after life. And what the Buddha saw was that that's the nature of things. There are causes for that. The causes can be eliminated, and there's a way to do it. And that's what was so rare and unique. And that way to do it is to realize the nature of reality. So no matter how challenging it might be, I think, to stick with these teachings that Venerable has been giving in tremendous detail, it's really important to realize that that this is the most unique aspect, one of the most precious aspects of the whole path, and so to stick with it. is really what I want to emphasize for people. It's crucial. I mean, understanding emptiness is crucial in making the practice a Buddhist practice, for example. And it's also what helps us cultivate faith in the Three Jewels. It helps us, it makes the Four Noble Truths, it's the only thing that makes the Four Noble Truths make sense. You know, if we did not have these teachings on the nature of reality and a path to help us understand how to get ourselves out of cyclic existence, there would be no point in meditating on the truth of suffering, or even its causes. What difference does it make? But so it is incumbent upon us, I think, as students of the Dharma, to really spend time on developing the conviction that liberation and enlightenment are possible, the reasonings for why they are, and that will fuel our practice in wanting to understand more and to cultivate the paths to that liberation in our own mind. And then His Holiness says gaining a good overview of the entire path is necessary before we can implement the teachings in a gradual manner. So when we have a broad view, we kind of know where we're going, and then we can assess where we are and focus on the things that that most support where we are at the moment, but we know where we're headed. So that's very important. So going to the text. Our author, Nam Kapel, said, in training and cultivating the ultimate awakening mind, there are three factors: the type of person to whom the instruction is given, the time for imparting the teachings, and the actual instructions on cultivating the ultimate awakening mind. So in these two weeks of teachings, Venerable Children covered the type of person who's to be given instruction and the time for imparting the teachings. So I'm going to read through a couple of the things that go in the text and then go back to some of the discussion that we had around all of this. So first point, type of person to whom the instruction should be given. Nam Kapel said, first of all, these teachings should be given to someone who possesses the qualities of a suitable recipient. To do so otherwise would be the cause of a transgression, both for the teacher and for the student. So who are these suitable qualities? What qualities does a suitable vessel have? He quotes Chandrakirti. Just as from seeing smoke, you know there's fire, and from seeing waterfowl, you know there's a lake, so from observing these characteristics, you will know the lineage of one having the mind of a bodhisattva. When an ordinary being, somebody who hasn't realized emptiness, when an ordinary being, on hearing about emptiness, feels great joy arising repeatedly within him or her, and due to such joy, tears moisten the eyes and the hair on the body stands up, this person has in his or her mind the seed of complete enlightenment and is a fit vessel for intimate teachings on emptiness. And Venerable said, even if this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a high bodhisattva. So let that be a warning. So this little thing about what happens if you teach to an unsuitable vessel. She referred to the Bodhisattva vows, the 11th one that says, you're not teaching emptiness to the untrained or the unprepared. You're breaking the vow if you do try to do that. The reason is because to teach emptiness to someone who is unprepared can be really dangerous for that person's mind. So they cited two cases. One is to teach someone whose faith is not very strong or is somewhat superficial. They hear these teachings on emptiness and kind of hear it as teaching nothingness, or hearing as teaching that nothing really exists. Then it's frightening, and that the first kind of person will then, out of that fear, completely reject the teachings, like throw the whole thing out. I don't want any part of this. Throw out the whole Buddha Dharma on the basis of that. And thus, the result of that will be they're creating causes not to receive the teachings in the future, ever. And thus are just wandering in cyclic existence endlessly without a way out, because having rejected it, then they're creating the causes to reject it or not to meet it again. So that, obviously is quite dangerous to a person, not just in that life, but for a long, 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 long time. And then the other situation that the text cites is teaching it to someone with superficial faith, who hears the teachings on emptiness, thinks it means nothing exists, and believes it. And says, great, nothing exists, therefore nothing matters. Doesn't matter what I do. I can do anything without any concern for the result of an unethical action. And so that person, based on that belief, will create negative karma after negative karma after negative karma, thinking it's fine, and will have a similar result. They just create the causes for way more pain and way more suffering than is necessary. But someone properly prepared, and the quote was, due to their faultless understanding of emptiness as conveying the meaning of dependent arising. So somebody who is prepared enough to get that emptiness and dependent arising are two sides of the same coin. Will hear these teachings on emptiness and use them to cultivate the paths leading to liberation and enlightenment. So that person who is prepared in that way, Venerable said, is the 100% superb recipient of the teachings on emptiness. Which does not mean that the rest of us shouldn't get them, which I'll get to. But Chandrakirti says, going on from that, this person who is extremely prepared properly, will always adopt pure ethics and observe them. They will give out of generosity, they will cultivate compassion, and they will meditate on patience. Dedicating such virtue entirely to full awakening for the liberation of wandering beings, they pay respect to accomplished bodhisattvas. So the next heading is the time for imparting the teachings, and it says when stability has been attained, impart the secret teachings. The secret teachings in this case being the teachings on emptiness. So Namkapel says, first deeply contemplate the 4 fundamental topics of the preliminary practice. Then the actual practice, become well acquainted with the awakening mind or bodhicitta and its attributes. Once you've stabilized your acquaintance with this aspect of method, then the secret teaching is imparted. So for me, all of this was a teaching on what we need to do to create the causes to be that person who, in some life, we will hear the teaching on emptiness and our hair will stand on end and our eyes will moisten and we will be so ripe in that moment. That doesn't happen like accidentally. Those beings that Chandrakirti is talking about didn't just like stumble upon a teaching and because they had some personal attribute that made them really especially qualified. That didn't come about that way. It came about purely and simply because they created the causes for it. And that's what we're doing right now. I mean, I should speak for myself. There might be somebody who has these kinds of signs, and great, good for you. Most of the people I know, when we talk about emptiness, we're like trying to figure it out. And trying to figure it out is part of that creating the causes. So I feel like this is an important thing for us to really think about. What makes a suitable recipient for these teachings? At some time, each of these superb, 100% A-OK recipients were as baffled as we are. At some time they were. And so it comes from, as Venerable pointed out really quite extensively in this teaching, it comes from practicing the method side of the path. Creating those causes comes from practicing the method side. And just to remind us, because I get in this little trap too, that studying the Dharma and studying these teachings on emptiness is not like what we studied in school. We don't learn it that way. It doesn't matter what your IQ is. It doesn't matter what kind of student you are, how well you test. It's not, we don't weigh it on that. People who are extremely bright walk into the teachings and goes over just goes over their heads, or they jump to wrong conclusions, or just like aren't interested. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with, well, again, have we created the causes? Have we created the causes? So stabilizing the four preliminaries, if we think about, meditating on precious human life, what it takes to get a precious human life, what are the causes for that, then we are meditating on cause and effect. We're getting some sense of the dependent nature of things. We move on to meditating on death and impermanence. We move on to then meditating on karma in this system of the four preliminaries. We're studying karma. We're really looking at the basis of cause and effect. What causes what. Studying that intensely. And then meditating on the miseries of cyclic existence, the fourth of those preliminaries. We're starting to look at the Four Noble Truths. What are the causes of the suffering that we have? We're looking at cause and effect again. So we're building a whole foundation based on understanding the dependent nature of things. Looking at dependent arising so that we already are well schooled in the fact that things exist, at least conventionally. Each meditation builds on the one before it. So it creates the cause for understanding the next one. So we even have an experiential understanding then of that cause and effect in that way. So it prepares that mind so that when we get to the Prasangika view of emptiness, we're not so likely to go to nihilism, which is the danger, in that regard. They found it was very interesting when Guy Newland was here teaching on the tenet systems. He explained to us that in the Tibetan monasteries, when they start their training, they are actually teaching from the Sautratika point of view. And I don't remember at what point in their training they start to learn the Prasangika point of view of emptiness, but the solid foundation of ethics and beginning their bodhicitta training and so forth comes from the point of view of the Sautratikas, which is Buddhist for sure, but what looks at conventional reality as truly existent. Then, with that solid understanding, they go into the Prasangika view. So I found that kind of interesting parallel to what what Nakapel was describing in the way we approach emptiness in the mind training teachings. The other thing that's true from practicing the method side of the path is that as we're going along, we have done a lot of purification. We've done a lot of creating merit. And I think people probably have had this experience even, that the more the purification practices you do, for no logically explainable reason, our minds are more receptive. They are. I think, people are nodding their heads. That's the experience. So through purifying through our Vajrasattva practice, through our 35 Buddhas practice, through beginning to really clear out some of the gross negative thoughts in our mind, the gross levels of afflictions, our minds are more stable so that the teachings can go in a more profound way. And then we're also accumulating merit as we go. So all the offering service that we do, all of the developing bodhicitta that we do, all of the benefiting others, all that kind of stuff makes it so that our minds are not jumping around so much. The teachings can go in, and we have there's less junk in the way of helping us get a clear understanding of what this view of emptiness is. Even cultivating compassion, even on the solitary realizer and hearer vehicles, they're doing that too. They're meditating on the four immeasurables. So they too are cultivating compassion or doing some method practices in order to make their minds receptive for the teachings on emptiness. And then paying homage to the bodhisattvas. By doing that, paying homages to our teachers and so forth, we're making our minds more receptive to cultivating the very qualities that we're paying homage to. So all of that method stuff if we keep in mind that we're doing these practices to help us progress along the path, yes, but even very specifically to help us make our minds more receptive to understanding the real key to get out of cyclic existence, I think it's helpful. It enriches that understanding and helps remember why we're doing these practices. Why are we doing this? What's the direct link to my own liberation? Oh, I'm creating the causes to be able to understand the key that gets me out the door. That's what it's about. We also need to remember, I think, that it's that this is a long process. Again, maybe some people, surely some people have planted seeds over many, many, many lifetimes, and this is the one where the teaching will click and the door will open. But I think for most of us, probably not so. So I went back to just look at, it's like, what exactly is the process? So I went to His Holiness again. And it was broken down in a way that I had not quite seen the detail before. I liked it. I thought it'd be good to share. In general, a meditator gains a conceptual realization of coarse impermanence first. Right? So that's the impermanence. The coarse impermanence is the dish breaks, the house falls down, the body dies, the person dies. And that we can see with our eye consciousness. But to have a realization of that is something else altogether. And then you have a realization of subtle impermanence, which you can't see with your eye. You have to do that through inference. So this is through meditation. Followed by a conceptual realization of the lack of the permanent, partless, and independent self. So we negate that next and have the realization of that. And that's the permanent, partless, independent one is the one that we talked about as soul-like. That solid me that we think goes from life to life to life. That's the acquired conception. This is followed by a conceptual realization of the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. Which to the Prasanghikas, which we've learned subsequent to this teaching, is the coarse selflessness of person. To the other schools, it's the subtle selflessness of person. This is followed by the conceptual realization of the emptiness of inherent existence of persons and phenomena, which is then followed by the direct realization of the emptiness of the inherent existence of persons and phenomena. So it's layer, it's like layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. It's slowly, it's almost like you can almost imagine it getting thinner and thinner and thinner, that concept, the thick concepts that we kind of wipe down with our meditations. So it takes time. It takes a lot of time. So as I was thinking about this process, I thought, well, then where does bodhicitta fit into this? And maybe you remember this. There was quite a lot of discussion about how students of sharp faculty develop emptiness, or their understanding of emptiness, at least to the conceptual level first, and then really polish up their bodhicitta. Whereas the students of more modest faculties focus on bodhicitta and the method side first, and then then develop their understanding of emptiness. So that somehow I still, even going back through it, this thing about which order of things doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But what His Holiness said when in speaking on this particular section of this book, Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun, don't let me forget to say this. In fact, I'll say it right now. On Alex Berzin's website, berzinarchives.com, there is an unpublished commentary on Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun that His Holiness did in the 1980s, 84 I think. So if you go to the Berzin archives and Google Attitude Training Like Rays of the Sun, or just search for it on the Alex Berzin site, you'll come up with this text. So it was interesting to compare it. But in talking this whole section about which comes first, the person of sharp faculty does this and the person of dull faculty does this, His Holiness and Alex reduced it to something very short. He said, for some people who are most receptive, it's helpful to train in ultimate bodhicitta first. Because once they understand it, this increases their capacity to actually work to achieve enlightenment and help all others. For most people, however, it is the opposite. They train in conventional bodhicitta first, and then when that is stable, they then train in deepest bodhicitta concerning what is more obscure or hidden, meaning emptiness. So there was no talk about sharp faculty, dull faculty. It was just like, for most of us, start with conventional bodhicitta. So if we think that we enter the bodhisattva path at the time when we have a stable, uncontrived, spontaneous thought to become Buddha in order to benefit, to liberate all sentient beings, that's when we enter the path of accumulation. And if we think that is the direct route for the people of modest faculties, I mean, that seems huge. It is huge. It's huge. So if that's the route for the people of modest faculties, then we can be patient and not frustrated in our studying of emptiness. Really to take it, and to be diligent with it, but also not trying to like grab it and eat it whole, which sometimes, I mean, maybe I'm speaking to myself, but sometimes I feel like I just want to know this so much. And it's not so helpful, actually. To really study with a more long-term view, I think, is more realistic, for sure. And who knows, maybe more successful. Because Venerable also really emphasized that method and wisdom need to be practiced together. They are actually supporting each other. So it's not like we do bodhicitta exclusively or we study emptiness exclusively. They need to work together, and that metaphor that we hear so often is that they are like two wings of a bird. Bird cannot fly without those two wings together. And the same is true for our progressing along the path and realizing Buddhahood. All that being said, the more we understand emptiness, the more it enhances our bodhicitta. Because the more we can really get that, as Guy said so often, sentient beings suffer unnecessarily. All of our suffering is unnecessary suffering based on this misunderstanding of the nature of reality. So the more we come to think about that and to reflect on it, the more we see that that's the state for everybody. For everybody. The sadder that becomes, and the more we're compelled to work for the benefit of sentient beings to correct that misunderstanding, if you will. I wanted to share a story, just this whole thing about creating causes. I read recently a story about the sixth patriarch of the Rinzai school of Chan, which is a different tradition. And they do have this idea about kind of instant or spontaneous enlightenment, which, isn't really within the way we think about things. But the story that he told just was so pertinent to the thing about creating causes. So this sixth patriarch told a story that as a small boy, his father had died. He was in China, this Chinese system. Father had died, and before his father's death, he'd been kind of banished to the south. He'd lost his good position, so they were living as peasants anyway. And the father died when the boy was quite young, and it was just him and his mother. So he's, a poor kid, no education, kind of living on the street, maybe selling in the market. I can't remember how they were making money, selling firewood or something like that. And one day in the market, he overheard a layperson on the street just reciting sutra. And on hearing the sutra, he suddenly had kind of an awakening So he asked this man what it was, and the man said, "Oh, I'm reciting the Diamond Sutra. And my master told me that it would be good even for lay people to say this out loud because it could be of benefit to me and to others." And so the boy said, "So who's your master?" And the man told him that he was a student of the fifth patriarch, way far in the north, and told him about the monastery and where it was. So the boy absolutely had to go meet this fifth patriarch. So somehow someone gave him some money to take care of his mom, and he walked for 30 days and got to the north and presented himself to the fifth patriarch. And the patriarch said, "And what can I do for you?" And the boy said, "Well, I've come for nothing but Buddhahood." And the patriarch looked at him and he said, "Well, you're a barbarian from the south. What makes you think you can be a Buddha?" And the boy said, "North or south makes no difference. Rich or poor makes no difference. Educated or not makes no difference. The Buddha nature is the same in every person." And the patriarch started to say something else to him, and then he said, and then the boy added, "May I tell you, Your Highness, that prajna, or wisdom, often arises in my mind." So the patriarch started to say something, and then just kind of realizing that all of his students were around, he said, "This barbarian is too bright. Send him off." So they sent him off to work. So he's off pounding rice somewhere. 8 months pass by, and then the fifth patriarch kind of goes to where he's been pounding rice. And so this is the school of Zen of Chan that talks in koans, right? So they're kind of doing riddles back and forth. But basically it comes down to the patriarch saying, "I get that your understanding of the Dharma is quite strong, and I cannot have you around because the people will be jealous and they could harm you." And the boy said, "I understand that I can't come anywhere near your hall because I don't want to draw attention to myself." So they now have recognized each other. So eventually, so they don't speak to each other again, though, for a long time. And then the patriarch says, calls all the assembly together, and he says, I see that realizing emptiness, of course, is the way that we all are going to get out of cyclic existence. But what I see you all doing every day is creating the causes to stay in cyclic existence. Just like our teacher says. To that effect. So he said, "It would be really good if you all meditated on emptiness, and please write a verse that shows me that you've realized the nature of mind." So the main teacher wasn't sure that he had, but he felt like he really needed to say something, and in a quite pure heart said, "Otherwise, why? I've been teaching falsely if I can't really write the verse that qualifies me here." Because the patriarch had said, if it's true that someone actually has realized this, I will make you the next patriarch. I will pass on the robe. So the teacher wrote a verse, and everyone across the monastery started reciting the verse, thinking, "Oh, this must be the answer. So if I recite this, I will also attain enlightenment." So then the boy heard somebody saying this verse, and as soon as he heard it, he thought, "That's not wisdom. That's not it." So he asked the person who was reciting it, "What's this about?" And then for the first time he heard all about this reciting the verse thing. And the boy said, "Well, I have a verse too." And so he asked this person to bring him to the hall where the verse had been written on the wall. Now the boy's illiterate. He said, "Would you read this to me line by line?" And so the boy did. This is the verse he read. "Our body is the Bodhi tree, and our mind is a mirror bright. Carefully we wipe them hour by hour, and let no dust alight." So the boy said, "I have a verse. Please write this up there for me." His verse was, "There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. Since all is void, where can the dust alight?" So the patriarch saw that verse. He had it wiped off the wall because he didn't want any harm to come to this boy. And eventually, in the night, they had some little secret messages back and forth, and the boy came to him, and he received teachings that night on the Prajnaparamita sutras and received enlightenment from the patriarch. So he was given the robe, and then the patriarch said, go. He said, people will hate this, that you have this. So go to the south, study, meditate, and when the time is right, you can teach and you can bring forth these implements that I'm giving you to prove that I've passed the lineage on to you. So in that way, the lineage was passed, and the sixth patriarch hid out for 15 years, really. And they were chasing him down. People were trying to get the robe away from him. But eventually, 15 years later, he came out and began to teach and told the story, which I loved. The point being, of course, hey, he created those causes. How can you possibly just listen on the street and boom, there it is. The mind is awake enough to know exactly what you've heard, and that know exactly where you need to go to hear the rest, to get what you need. So these kinds of stories for me are very, very inspiring in terms of planting the seeds now. We plant the seeds as well as we can. And then, who knows, some life, some street corner. I mean, how do we get here? We don't know, but we did something. How are we on the other end of that little video screen? Somewhere, somehow, we did something. We didn't come into this cold. So, anyway, that's a really good reason for creating all the causes for this. So, back to the text. We were leaving it time for imparting the teachings, and the root text says, consider all phenomena as like a dream. Examine the nature of unborn awareness. The remedy itself is released in its own place. And place the essence of the path on the nature of the basis of all. So those are the 4 instructions. So consider all phenomena as like a dream. Venerable said it's what you're supposed to do in post-meditation. After you meditate on emptiness, after that, in between the sessions, you practice seeing things as like a dream. But here, she said, it seems to imply that we try to see things like a dream, even when understanding of emptiness is not so good. So that's something that we can do now. And then she talked quite a lot about how it's very, very important to remember the analogy very specifically, and to hold that phenomena are like a dream, not are a dream. I think Venerable John Powell brought up at that point that the Charles Manson, life's a dream, man. It's all a dream. That's, of course, a horrific extreme. But we can get confused, I think, and especially in trying to convince ourselves that, oh, it's a dream. We can't just look around and start saying it. Oh, it's all a dream. That's not going to do it. But this is one of the places where she then led a little meditation or a little reflection on how it is that we can see things as like a dream. So in this case, just thinking over and over that things are like a dream in that they appear to exist in one way, but they don't exist like that. And she used the example of the reflection in a mirror. The one I think about the most is actually the reflection of the moon in water. So that on a still lake, you can see a perfect full moon so clearly. I mean, when it's still enough and the moon is bright enough and low enough in the sky, you can even see the craters in the water. It's just like a perfect reflection. And I was trying to imagine circumstances. When would you actually mistake it for a moon? If you were on a boat in the middle of the lake and it was pitch dark and you just woke up out of sleep and rolled over and looked, you could be confused for a minute. But looking at there, it looks like a moon. It has the appearance of being a moon. But it doesn't exist as it appears. It's not a moon. It's a reflection. The reflection is there. But it's not a moon. And that analogy is exactly the same way that we can look at ourselves and look at other phenomena, thinking again and again how it is that it appears to be right there, that tree, just vibrating greenness and treeness and looking like it stood up there all by itself. It's completely independent. Appears to be existing from its own side, and yet it doesn't exist as it appears. But it doesn't mean there's nothing there at all. So in that way, exercising the mind that sees phenomena as like a dream. Like a dream in the sense that dream things don't really exist. Although when we're in the dream, they seem very, very real. We think it's real. We're totally convinced it's real. And then we wake up and go, oh, it was a dream. Sometimes we go, thank goodness, it was just a dream. But when we're in it, the appearance is very, very vivid. She said that Geshe Chekchak uses the example of a television. You know, that we watch the screen and we can get very, very engaged emotionally. You know, at some level, even though we know it's just the TV, at some level we're tied in enough to have some emotional reactions. We're kind of believing that there's real people there. But it's just an appearance on the screen. That's all it is. So when we realize emptiness, then when we know that, we realize emptiness, we still have the appearance of true existence, but we don't believe it anymore. We know that the appearance is false. And so for sure, then things appear as though like a dream. But for us to try to practice it and think about that throughout the day was what she was recommending to us. To practice looking in the basis of designation to see if we can find the thing that appears to exist so vividly from its own side. And to analyze again and again and again and again and again and again and again. She also said that, you know, the more we can do that, the more we begin, even right now, to realize how much we project on other people. Even if we still see the other person as inherently existent, by starting to analyze what's within the basis of designation, where the person is in the basis of designation, or where the angry person is in the basis of designation, where the irritating person is. You know, whatever label we're slapping on people, when we start to really look in the basis, it starts to help us see what kind of junk we're just projecting right on the person, even if we don't even come close to understanding the lack of inherent existence of the person itself. We can certainly see that we're projecting qualities that aren't there. We're projecting motivations that aren't there. So it really helps us right off the bat. Venerable also suggested an antidote to remember. I think it's well worth writing down. It's very useful. When we feel ourselves getting riled up, to train ourselves in catching this moment and saying to ourselves, this is just an appearance to my mind. This will also only work, I think, after we've done some analysis so that we've got some basis for saying that. We can't do it like an affirmation. This is just an appearance to my mind, this is just an appearance to my mind. I don't think that'll work. But when we've done some meditation and really thought about analyzing things, then we can use that as a mnemonic. Oh, this is just an appearance to my mind. Right, this is just an appearance to my mind. The next line, examine the nature of unborn awareness. This is a technique for establishing the lack of true existence of the consciousness that apprehends inherent existence. So this line is about the emptiness of the mind. So she said we speak in terms of subject and object. The subject is the consciousness. The object is the thing the consciousness is apprehending. So examining the nature of unborn awareness looks at the nature of mind. So then she led this wonderful analysis of mind that I thought was quite helpful. Because it does seem, if I just think about my mind right now, it does seem like there's a solid unitary thing that I call my mind. My mind. About the size of a bread box, actually, in my internal vision. But when we look, there's, is there a unitary thing that is our mind? So, first of all, it's a huge expanse of time. Vast. Even if we only look at this lifetime, moment by moment, that's a lot of years. If you look into beginningless time, that's a huge continuity that has many, many, many parts. Many parts in a long, 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 long continuity of something. There's all those parts of the length, and then there's, as we've been studying the mind, there's the primary minds and there are the mental factors. There are the 5 sense consciousnesses, and then there's a mental consciousness. So there's all these aspects or parts of the mind that don't lend themselves at all to actually this view of it being completely unitary, the size of a bread box, and it's the thing that's making me tick. So we don't have to look very deeply, I think, to begin to take apart that first level of, holding it there. Can we find a moment of mind that actually is the mind? I mean, if we just catch it. Is there one that is the mind? Is there one that's my mind? No, you can't find it. Cannot find it. See, this great illustration, which is true for me, this is really how my mind appears to me. She says, it's as though we have our mind here, it's just like this boom, and then along comes an object and they sort of accidentally bump into each other. But it's not true at all. I mean, the mind has to have an object to cognize in order to exist. It's completely dependent. So there's the moment of consciousness, there's the object that it's apprehending or cognizing, and then there's the sense power that's engaged. So right there's this whole level of dependence that means it cannot possibly be independent in any way, shape, or form. And yet, for sure, it just seems like this. Mind, object. Constant moments of clarity and awareness. The function of the mind is to apprehend. The mind, the consciousness, has to have an object. Always. Always. I found that very interesting. So the previous moment of mind, object, and the sense power. All. So then she said, the next level then is we think of it as more like an old-fashioned film strip. So there's this picture with a little line, and then this picture, and then this picture, and this picture, and it's just going by so fast that we can't see the lines between it, but it's like this film strip. Which is kind of exactly where my mind went when she said, it wasn't solid unitary. But again, examining, can you isolate a single moment? And can we isolate a moment, and have it, if we think about it, can their moment of mind exist in isolation that way without being dependent on the moment before it? No. But it's certainly not the way we think of our own minds. It's not how it appears to us at all. So meditating on this is the next step in this whole process. Third line is that the remedy itself is released in its own place. So this looks at the emptiness of the self, according to Nam Kapel. The person is merely labeled independence on the body and mind. The remedy itself is released in its own place. So this is where, meditating on this is where we do the 4-point analysis. So we identify the object of negation, looking at what appears to the mind. This is how the self appears to the mind, appearing as an independent, solid control thing. So the instruction is to come up with to imagine a situation in which we have a strong emotion and really look at how the I appears at that moment. And they say this is the most difficult part of that meditation. Certainly the more we've been studying the various levels of subtlety of the appearance of the self, I can see how difficult it is, actually, to identify that very object of negation that we're looking for. Then we establish the pervasion, this thought that if an independent self existed in the way that it appears when I conjure it up that way, it would either have to be completely separate from the aggregates or completely one with the aggregates. Like there's no other way something can exist. It would have to be like that. And certainly Jeffrey Hopkins in his teachings on how to meditate on emptiness talks about convincing ourselves that this is true. That something has to either be one or separate. That there's no other way. So that's also kind of a side investigation to convince ourselves that this pervasion is actually accurate. The third thing is then to examine all parts of our body and all aspects of our mind to see if that I, as it appears, is one, is there with any one of them. And then determining that the I is not the same as the body or mind, combination of the two, then we search to see if that self is independent of the body or mind. If that I is somewhere across the room, sitting in Singapore while we're here, something like that. And then she said another explanation of this line is that it's actually looking at the emptiness of emptiness itself. But she didn't go into detail on that. Then the fourth line is place the essence of the path on the nature of the basis of all. Which is very florid language, I think, that means put your concentration on emptiness without distraction. That's what to do. So again, she went through the methods. We began by developing a correct understanding, which is what we're trying to do now. Then we try to meditate on what we understand. That takes us slowly through an inferential understanding, and we focus on that as well as we can. And in the break time, practicing seeing things like an illusion. And then the final line in this section says, between sessions be like a conjurer. Nam Kapel says, like a conjurer feels no attachment for the illusions he creates because he knows they are non-existent. So that sounds a whole lot like the first line to me. But to really practice seeing things as like an illusion or like a dream. And then realizing, as the conjurer does, who made this elephant appear, or made this person be sawed in half. I don't believe it, because I know the trick. I know the trick. So helping us know the trick, helping us think about that trick, so that we too don't believe in the appearance that we created, that our own ignorance created. And I believe page 13, yep, is blank. So that's a really condensed version of what Venerable covered over those 2 weeks, but it then leads into the next section, which is the actual instruction for developing ultimate bodhicitta. So, dedicate. Just rejoicing, really, in being able to receive these teachings. Having created the causes, however we wandered in to hear the Prasangika view of emptiness. Rejoicing in giving that merit away generously to all beings.